Welcome to Walpole Five-0. I'm Chief John Carmichael. Today is June 14th, 2017. And before we get into the log entries, want to thank John Tinkler down at New Pond Village for inviting the Walpole Police Department to come down there today and speak to our seniors about just an overview of the Walpole Police Department. And we got into all different aspects of it. Showed them our mission statement, our vision and values, that type of thing, as well as our organizational chart, how the department operates, our community policing initiatives and the programs that we offer, as well as statistics on the main issues that we're dealing with, such as overdoses, the drug issue, the ancillary crime that's associated with it, like robberies and car breaks and larcenies and that type of thing. So we gave them a great overview. It was a really good turnout, and we appreciate John inviting us down there. And I know there's a couple people out there that watch Walpole Five-0, so we appreciate that, and hopefully we're keeping you aware of what's going on in the Walpole community. So want to mention field days. Our officers had visited all of our schools in the past week or so with their field days, and as you know, that's always the kids know that it's almost summertime, and they're getting out of the classroom and having some fun activities. So it was good for the officers to go down there and participate and kind of engage the kids during field day, and had a great time. Even myself and Deputy Chief McKenzie got out there on the mountain bikes and visited a bunch of the schools, so that was fun. And you know, this is the last week of school, really last full week, and wish all of our students the best this summer and their summer vacation, and make it a good, safe one. So as I should mention, our first Walpole Police Youth Academy will start the first week after we get out of school. It'll be Monday through Friday. So we also look forward to that, and we'll give you some updates as to how that works out. Want to mention our med return box that's in the lobby, because I got some questions about it this week. We have a box, or a return box, in our police station lobby that is for people so that they can return unused pharmaceuticals. And our goal is to get those drugs off of the and out of the medicine cabinets. And do we still use that word, medicine cabinets? But out of the house and into the med return box, and we collect those pharmaceuticals and we bring them up to a location, and we have those destroyed in the incinerator, statewide program. So if you have unused prescriptions, please feel free to come in and drop them off. They can still be in the bottles or the bag or whatever they're in. It just all goes in the incinerator anyways. What we ask is you don't put sharps in there, so no syringes. We can get rid of that stuff separately, but that box is there. We get rid of probably 500 pounds of pharmaceuticals every year, just in the Walpole Police Department alone. So there's a lot of unused drugs out there that we can help you get rid of. Dispensaries. Walpole, we talked about this last week, but we did vote to opt out of having marijuana dispensaries or pot shops or facilities in Walpole. I think it was a good idea. As a public safety perspective, I'm always worried about the impact it can have on our youth, and the perception of harm with this drug, and normalizing the drug, and our kids thinking that it's not bad and it's not harmful, and it's normalizing it. And I think having those open stores, and this is aside from the liquor store issue, but it can have a negative impact. And actually, if you look at places such as California, in locations where there are more dispensaries, so you have marijuana dispensaries, that area that's surrounding the dispensaries have increases in marijuana-related hospitalizations, and which always seeps down into our youth. So there's actually a study that shows that in certain areas where these dispensaries are, for every dispensary, there's another increase of 7% of emergency room episodes based on being near this, having this drug so readily available. And as we know, it's not just marijuana plant, but it's also the edibles and the concentrates, the oils and that kind of thing that add to this this problem. So I think Walpole made the right decision here, and if it's something that the town decides to do later on, then so be it. But there are some amendments up going through the House and then soon to be the Senate this week that will talk about these dispensaries and local control and how towns can actually opt out from these programs. So that wanted to give a follow-up on a breaking and entry in motor vehicles. Last week I reported that we had several car breaks in and around the neighborhood near Big Y, where we've had, I think, 3 or 4 car breaks, and we had some credit cards that were stolen and cash out of those vehicles. And in a couple of those instances, the credit cards were used. And particularly, our detectives followed up down in Rhode Island, and we were able to identify an individual in relation to the car breaks. They used the credit cards that were stolen from the vehicles. It appears to be a male suspect, possibly a black or Hispanic male. These pictures aren't great here, but the individual was wearing a light blue hat, a dark jacket with a hoodie, and the suspect, we believe that the vehicle being used is like a light blue, probably a Hyundai Santa Fe. And I'll just show you a picture of that. And as I mentioned, the photographs, they didn't come out great on the bulletin. The video always shows a little better, but as of right now, that's the individual that we're looking for relative to these breaks. And I know you may not be able to identify this person from that photograph, but maybe perhaps on the clothing, the description, as well as that motor vehicle that was involved. So we'll continue to investigate that. I want to mention our thoughts on the victims down in Virginia today, especially senators, and I won't even say senators because they're citizens, just like everyone else, but there was an active shooting situation down there. And I think with that said, that it's important to note that our department here, the Walpole Police Department, trains very hard through Metro, through working with Boston PD, and through working with within our own agency on training officers on active shooter situations. And it's very important to know that we train very hard with these situations. It's not something that happens every day, but between 2000 and 2013, there was over 160 of these incidents that occurred throughout the country, with over 1,000 casualties. And you know, we train for this, even though it's not something that's likely to happen every day. It's something that potentially can happen. And in fact, this week, our officers here in Walpole are at the range. They're doing tactical firing this week. We're doing night firing this week because, you know, we need to train in the dark just as we do in the light. And we train consistently with our schools, and in the event that an active shooter type situation had happened there. But relative to that, no matter where it would take place, we're going to respond the same way. And part of the change in this was after the Columbine High School active shooter, where the officers used to be trained in just setting up a perimeter and working the scene from the outside. And that doesn't happen anymore. As a result of Columbine, actually, police officers now, upon arrival to an active shooter, they're going to rally, and they're going to make entry, and they're going to go get the bad guy. And that's the way that it works now. And so they have to be trained to do that. And I think we do a good job with it here in Walpole. Selectman Gallivan and Jim Johnson, our town administrator, last year helped the department get some equipment, Kevlar helmets and shock plates for body armor, different than the vest that I have on now, but these are shock plates that can take a rifle round, have been equipped in our cruisers, which we never had before, and we're actually using that equipment to train with. So this week at the range, the officers will respond tactically, and then we'll put this gear on and then move towards the target that they're supposed to be taking out. So, but again, our thoughts go out to those victims down there in Virginia, and it's a very sad thing, unfortunately, that's been taking place in this country and others. So getting into the log, on June 6th, is going back to June 6th, so we had overdose resources. The prior week I mentioned a particular overdose we had, and as I've mentioned before, the old way of doing things was that somebody overdosed, and if it was a save, they were transported to the hospital, and that was it. Like the first responders brush off their hands and they go to the next call. We don't do that anymore. The way that we handle these types of situations now is we take every step to save that person and get them to the hospital, and then we follow up with that individual and or their family to get those resources needed. And Patrolman Murphy, who is one of our newest officers, went back to that residence and met and brought some of those resources. And I've shown them the kits before on Walpole 5-0, but we have resources that can help them and their family to get into a treatment facility or help them with recovery and etc. So just wanted to mention that. June 7th, a suspicious motor vehicle. This vehicle, during recess, drove around the back of the Boyden School. And if you've ever been to the Boyden School, there's a kind of a asphalt path that goes around the back of the school. But this vehicle, it's very unusual for that to occur during school hours for a car to do that, and then drove up where the swimming pool is, through that parking lot and back out onto Jason's path to Washington Street. We never found the vehicle. It was only described as a white sedan, no registration plate or anything. We never really found out what the reason or the purpose why somebody would drive back there. But in any event, we did check on it. We kept an officer down there for quite some time, seeing if it came back, and it never did. So that was it with that. Fraud. There was a dispute with a woman who had ordered $265 worth of home oil, and the company was Law Fuel and Energy. I think they were out of Mansfield, and this company, after she had paid for the oil, never responded. They didn't come and deliver it. This was after 2 scheduled times that they failed to show up. It turns out that it wasn't a fraud situation. It was just more of a business decision or whatever else, and we will work to help that individual get their money back, but obviously they no longer want to use that company, so we're going to move on for that. But it wasn't an actual fraud case. Shoplifting, there was reported 2 juveniles at a location on Route 1, loss prevention. Located 2 individuals that were shoplifting in there. They didn't have a record. We didn't take out any charges, but what we did do is notified the parent, who was a very good parent, and sometimes you can tell right away when you meet the parent that that will be a learning experience for them, and that there was probably more that the mom would do than the police could ever do. So we like to see that, chalk it up as a learning experience, and they were sent on their way, no charges. In arrest, so got a report. It's kind of a strange call, but we got a call of a person yelling for help. This was along Route 1 by the Big Y. The vehicle ended up going out onto Route 1 and traveling in the opposite direction, traveling northbound on the southbound lane for some time, and then turned off where Route 27 is. The vehicle then took off, so we were getting some calls on it, not really sure what was happening, but we were able to stop that vehicle closer to Walpole Center. There was one individual that was reportedly the victim in this case, who we transported back to the Walpole police station. However, it turns out that it was like a verbal argument in the vehicle, and but it turns out that the individual had 4 outstanding default warrants out of Brockton, so she had to be placed under arrest. So the officer made the arrest here at the station, and then just followed up with the actual report on the yelling for help, which, as I mentioned, was just a verbal. So June 8th was a well-being check. Person called an acquaintance and said that they were going to overdose on purpose on pills, and the officers reached out to that alleged victim, and turns out that everything was okay. It was more of a verbal argument that took place, and making a threat in that case to that they would harm themselves. So turns out that there really was no issue with the overdose. Traffic complaint, report of motorcycles operating erratically on Route 1. This is the time of year for that. You can actually, if you live in East Walpole, South Walpole, you can hear them even late at night. 10 o'clock at night, you'll hear the motorcycles up and down Route 1. most of the time we don't catch up to them, or they may not stop for us. But Officer Giblin ended up locating all 3 motorcycles, was able to stop all 3 of them that were involved in this erratic operation, and all 3 of them, the trifecta, they all 3 get citations. So good job by Officer Giblin with that. We don't get those ones too often. So sex offender working. I mentioned sometimes when the registered sex offenders come in, they redo their annual registrations, or if a new sex offender level 1, 2, or 3 comes into town, they register with us. This individual was only working in town, so figured I'd mention it because it's important to note that even when a sex offender is working in the community, they have to notify the department. And we basically book them in and then log it into the statewide sex offender registry information system. A disturbance on Route 27 by Gilmore's. Again, this was similar to the other call we had earlier that night, but a passenger yelling for help. The officers were able to locate those individuals. It ended up being a verbal argument only, no physical contact, and ironically, they were also Brockton residents. So there was our initial one was from Brockton, and this was a completely unrelated vehicle, individuals from Brockton, but peace was restored and they were sent on their way. An arrest for OUI drugs. As I've mentioned before, there's OUI liquor and OUI drugs. They're essentially under the same statute, but treated a little bit differently. This was at a gas station on Route 1. There was actually an off-duty Norwood police officer female operator who was passed out behind the wheel while this vehicle was in the gas station lot. The officers responded up there. They were able to wake up the operator. She had stated that she was at Twin Rivers all day gambling, and she did show some severe signs of impairment with pinpoint pupils. She was very lethargic. The officers gave an exit order. She came out and they issued standard field sobriety tests, which she failed. And as a result, she was placed under arrest. She was definitely impaired. The officers, she had been operating the vehicle, and they placed her under arrest for OUI drugs. During the search incident to arrest, when the officers went back in there, they located a drug called gabapentin, or it's also, the brand name is Neurontin, and that's an anti-convulsing type of drug. It treats nerve damage, but we also, it can treat pain to a certain degree. So what we do is we see that drug a lot in our overdoses, and hence I don't know what other drugs this individual may have been on, but we did find the gabapentin. It will cause that effect, and it did. And but this drug is also involved in a lot of our overdoses. When we see heroin or opioid, if we see Percocet type of drugs involved in overdoses, many times we see some type of an opiate. We'll see benzodiazepines, we'll see Valium, that type of drugs, and a lot of times we'll find gabapentin as well. So that drug is a dangerous drug, and it's still tied into our overdoses, unfortunately. So main issue is always OUI drugs is removing the people from the street so they don't endanger the rest of our motorists. June 9th, a well-being check, request for a well-being check in East Walpole, and this one was kind of scary because it was an elderly gentleman who we couldn't find. There was one vehicle in the driveway. Weren't able to raise this individual for quite some time. As we started to follow up with area departments, it turns out that the state police located the individual up in Weston, and so they took actions to make sure the man was safe and everything turned out fine. So you always like those ones when everything's good to go on that. Malicious destruction. A 29-year-old was reportedly caused damage to his mom and boyfriend's house in South Walpole. Officer Wilmot started to investigate that. During his investigation, he was able to ascertain information from Franklin PD that the individual who caused the damage was now under arrest in Franklin for an unrelated incident. So that situation was kind of taken care of by default. And we will follow up with the summons on the damage to the person's property. Another arrest, this one was for OUI liquor. This was a 46-year-old Somerset male. He was speeding, and Officer Giblin was conducting speed radar enforcement, and this individual was on radar traveling 48 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone. When Officer Giblin stopped this vehicle, he noticed immediate signs of impairment due to alcohol, and he got that person out of the vehicle. At one point, he actually asked him where he was driving to, and he said that he was driving to Massachusetts. But we did do some field sobriety tests, and he failed those tests, and as a result, he was arrested and subsequently refused to take a breath test here at the police station. On June 10th, there was a defacing property. Longview staff member called and said that an individual who they believed they had reported missing the night before kind of got some revenge and squirted ketchup all over their vehicle and their windshield. Officer Haber is conducting the investigation with that one. So kind of a defacing property type of a call there. Abandoned vehicle. This actually happened right here on Stone Street. A caller reports that they found a zip car at the end of their driveway, just kind of sitting there, nobody around it. Officer Moriarty went down there, he found the vehicle, and it's kind of a strange situation, but Officer Moriarty contacted Zipcar, and it turns out that that vehicle was broken down. So essentially, the person who had it broke down with the Zipcar and just kind of abandoned it there, and as a result, we contacted Zipcar, and they were going to have it removed by a local tow company. So protective custody, a 50-year-old male was put in protective custody. This was by Officer Foley. We received multiple calls that the individual was walking. They were walking on Main Street, 1A, and in an erratic manner, and as a result, this person was placed in protective custody by Officer Foley. And that is to ensure that person's safety and that they don't walk out into traffic and get struck. A house check. Caller reports they thought that somebody was in the home. The officers responded down there, and they found that it appears that maybe the wind blew it open, but there was an open door and the house was checked and secure. Mandated report. So Norwood Hospital, Officer Bethany received a call from Norwood Hospital. There was a 10-year-old at Norwood that was being treated for a pellet gun shot wound. And it turns out that Officer Bethany did conduct an investigation into this. It turns out that it was adults and the juvenile who were conducting target practice at their own home, and there was a ricochet, and the person who's the 10-year-old was struck. They were okay, and as a result, Officer Bethany closed out this case. The hospital is mandated to call us when these types of situations occur, and Officer Bethany did a good job following up. But you teach. It's good. They're teaching the kid. Hopefully, when they're under 18, safety precautions that come along with that responsibility. On June 11th, a noise complaint. Officer Haber had to check on a group that was at the basketball court. This is up at the high school, and it was after hours. It was very late. It was like after midnight, so they were sent on their way. Suspicious activity during a motor vehicle stop. Officers noticed vehicles exiting from Goldie's on Route 1A. That's unusual for the time of night because it was very late and on the midnight shift. So Officer Haber went up there and conducted a check of that premises and located some employees. It turns out that they were dropping off all the crushed vehicles that were from the monster truck event at Gillette Stadium. So, and I guess there was a lot of them. So they were dropping off all the crashed up cars from getting crushed. An arrest, this call here, we got a bunch of calls. And again, this is similar to a recent call that we got involving an airsoft gun that resembled a real firearm, and officers taking action with that type of situation. But we got multiple calls, including one from a retired transit police officer who reported as a man riding a bicycle down Winter Street, and that individual had a gun, handgun, firearm in the small of his back, and the individual was described as 5'9", dirty blondish hair. He was a white male and wearing a blue T-shirt. Officers ended up encountering that man on Summer Street by Shufelt Road, and as a result of these actions, he was ordered to the ground, and the officers moved in and they removed what ends up being like an airsoft gun, again resembling a real firearm. So this individual was arrested. During the search incident to arrest, when they searched him, they found that he had throwing stars in his pocket, which are in Massachusetts are considered a dangerous weapon. It's a felony to carry a weapon such as that. So in addition to disturbing the peace of people being shocked and alarmed by the driving down the street, this individual has a firearm in the small of his back. He was arrested on the disturbing the peace and carrying the dangerous weapon, to wit the throwing stars. Now it's important to note that Massachusetts, we don't have a really open carry law, so essentially if you have a license to carry a firearm, it's typically concealed, but there's nothing in the statute that says that carrying a firearm openly is really against the law. So in cases like this, officers have to establish reasonable suspicion to believe that there's a crime being committed. And so what do they base that on? They base that on the fact that it's not normal behavior to see somebody riding a bicycle with a handgun stuck in the small of their back, unholstered and not secured. So what could you equate that to? Well, reasonably you could believe that that individual might commit a crime, such as a robbery. I mean, that's where, if you were going to rob a convenience store, that may be how somebody would carry it, like in the small of their back, unholstered, quick access, in that type of activity. So the officers had obviously every right to stop the individual in this case because of those actions, and believing that there could be a crime committed. And ultimately, after stopping that individual, they search incident to arrest and find this dangerous weapon, which is considered a felony here in Massachusetts. So as a result, he was arrested. Now we want to thank everybody, all of the citizens that took the time to call. Some of them even stopped and pulled along the area as he was riding the bicycle to point him out or to keep us updated as to where his location was until the officers got there. So great job on that. And also want to mention that the officers did a good job in their restraint in dealing with an individual, again, who not only has a gun, but has a gun that's very quick access to it in the small of his back, and then initially wasn't being compliant with the officers' commands when they first responded. So good job by the officers on that one. Officer Moriarty, I think, was the first officer there, as well as Sergeant O'Connell. Suspicious vehicle. Officer Slavin and Officer Doherty located a suspicious vehicle on Production Road. They FIO'd those individuals. They checked out okay, and they were sent on their way. FIO is a field interview observation, which we log in, like if we deal with somebody that's where they shouldn't be at a certain time, or any type of suspicious activity. We conduct a field interview observation, log that in the event that something does turn out to be wrong later on, and let them go on their way. Birthday visit down on Page Ave. Thank Officer Slavin, Doherty, and Foley. This one came at the child's request, and he was apparently a big fan of the police, and we always like to hear that. It's good to hear. And the officers went down there, and their presence was received very well. So we want to wish a happy birthday to that little boy, and hopefully a future police officer. In arrest, part of a sweep, but Officer Parlon arrested an individual at their home in Norwood after he was involved in assault that occurred in Walpole previously, and officers went over there as part of a warrant sweep and arrested that individual on the warrant that was issued by the court. In elder abuse, we had a report of elder abuse by a caretaker. We do have made the mandated reporting notifications on this case. Officer Slavin is the investigating officer, and we're always happy to investigate these types of incidents where there's other caretakers involved in this that believe that someone may be abusing this elder, and we take that very seriously. And Officer Slavin is conducting the initial investigation, and we will follow up with that with detectives, as well as the witnesses involved. On June 12th, marijuana possession. This occurred at Longview Farm. 17-year-old left their backpack. When somebody went to check it, they discovered there was marijuana. As we know, marijuana is taken off the books here in Massachusetts. I don't call it legal, but we taken off the books, and people under 21 cannot possess it. So this individual is 17 and cannot possess it. So they were just given the riot act, if you will, and no charges will be filed. But that was that. So that's Walpole 5-0 for today, and thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.